Petersburg for a review of the minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was a very complicated minutes this time, but I do approve the minutes.
Is there discussion? Thank you, Representative Petersburg. Is there discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, the motion prevails. So, members, we'll just have a slight change in the agenda. Before we hear House File 235, we will have an overview of MnDOT's work on tribal relations, and we'll start with Mr. Udine and others. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm Eric Rudine with MnDOT Government Affairs, and look forward to meeting those of you I haven't met yet. We're busy trying to get on your calendars, and so appreciate the fact that we're in a new session here and lots of work to do. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Adrian Carretero, who is from our Office of Tribal Relations. And he's got a short overview of some of the work that we've done in that area and are doing. And Mr. Chair, I know that you have a PowerPoint. I'm not sure if that will be brought up on the screen, but you should also have a paper copy in your packets. So with that, I will turn it over to Adrian.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. I am Adrian Carretero. I work with the MnDOT Office of Tribal Affairs, and I'm the Tribal Operations Liaison. So if you have access to this PowerPoint, we have prepared for you a few slides to give you an overview of our office and how we work with Indian country. So we'll go over who are the tribal governments in Minnesota, why do we have a relationship with tribes, and what do we do to facilitate better working relationships with the tribes. First slide you'll see is a picture of tribal nations on what is called Turtle Island. As you can see, there is a diversity of different cultures. This is before 1492. And it shows that rich, complex diversity of different peoples and cultures. The second slide is an overview of federal Indian policy. Federal Indian policy establishes a relationship between the United States government and tribal nations. We can find that in the US Constitution, Article 6, which gives the federal government a responsibility, a trust responsibility for dealing with tribes. And that goes with what we call a pendulum of 7 different time periods that had a kind of defined the destiny and the relationship of those tribes and the US federal government. Recognition of tribe and their sovereignty is really important. This is the very core of the reason why we're here as an office. The state of Minnesota would not have this kind of relationship but for the sovereignty of tribes. And we find this recognized in the US Constitution, in treaties that the United States have with different tribal nations, Act of Congress, so federal statutes, of course, and presidential executive orders. The next slide is relating to treaties. And these are the times in the mid-1800s when the federal government had a need to expand west and basically traded with tribal nations along the way, showing a clear recognition of tribal sovereignty to cede land where the tribes would cede land and get in return some rights, including most important ones would be the right to education, economic rights, hunting, fishing, gathering, to preserve a way of life. So now, looking at our state of Minnesota, tribal governments, we have 11 federally recognized tribal nations, and you can see the map. They are on the left, the seals, and on the right, MnDOT's regional office, or what we call district's offices, and Indian country overlap. We have 7 Anishinaabe nations, that are federally recognized in the state of Minnesota, and they are 4 Dakota nations. There is also land by La Crosse that is held in trust by the Ho-Chunk Nation, which is part federally recognized in the state of Wisconsin. And so we call that Indian country. This is a term we often refer to, and that includes reservation, boundaries, trust land that may be outside of the reservation, Indian allotments, which are basically parcels that are held in trust by individual tribal members, and dependent Indian communities. And there is no very clear definition about that, but that could be identified as certain urban areas where tribal governments provide regular services to tribal members that reside outside of the reservation. They are dependent. All right, things are important here in how we do business are sovereignty, obviously. Tribes are established governments with significant authority, tribal courts. They make their own laws. State law has limited jurisdiction. We have limited jurisdiction on reservations and in Indian country overall. Often tribes are found to be regulators of federal law, and then tribes retain their sovereignty. It was not granted by the US to them. It was predating the foundation of the United States of America. So tribes also can levy taxes. They can establish membership, so decide who may or may not be a tribal member on the roster. They decide their own fate, and I think this is what we see today in rebuilding tribal nations. There are a lot of policies that are focused to be more independent on an energy standpoint, access to healthcare, and other very important matters. There is a nation-to-nation relationship, and there is a relationship with the state of Minnesota. It was just recognized recently. You may be aware of this statute, Minnesota Statute 1065, which establishes the recognition for the first time of our state with tribal nations. It's a unique legal relationship. It also establishes training for state employees, and establishes the tribal liaison position in the agencies of the executive branch, so that is what I'm part of. And it also provides for consultation with tribal leaders, elected leaders. It has to be meaningful, and it has to be timely. Often in those interactions, what we try to do is understand tribal interests and try to come to the table already thinking of solutions. How can we work together on this, on overlapping issues? All right. MnDOT has a policy that is kind of, each agency has a policy with tribal nations to kind of provide more technical approach to how we're going to tackle these consultations or coordination with tribal officials. It's important to note that 11% of our transportation infrastructure is located in Indian country. So there is a big stake and a very important tribal interest in transportation. You can see a picture here of our former commissioner during a consultation with the Fond du Lac Band of Chippewa, Lake Superior, and of course a picture of our current commissioner, Nancy Daubenberger. Next slide is the org chart of our office. So we're the Office of Tribal Affairs at MnDOT reports to the commissioner. The deputy commissioner is a direct link to that director of tribal affairs. And then we have two different teams, one that focuses on partnerships and another one that focuses on the training of state employees. So our role is to comply with Minnesota Statute 1065, comply with a policy, build relationships, create partnerships, and educate on tribal issues. Some examples of what we've done so far is working on the right-of-way. This is our circle of influence. When highways intersect and cross reservation and villages, this is where MnDOT has the most impact and where our work is really has the most importance within Indian country. We also work on employment, and today this is why we're here. This is very important on or near reservation. We work on cultural preservation, cultural resources, because the tribes were here for thousands of years. There are a lot of cultural resources throughout the state of Minnesota. We work on safety, for pedestrian safety, because that is still a challenge to own vehicles and get to the grocery store, to school. We were successful at doing the reservation road signs and treaty road signs, which kind of informs the users of whether we're entering a reservation, because often it's difficult to tell when you're driving on the highway. And also is a recognition of sovereignty, just like you could see with a border of another jurisdictional entity. We work on exchanging plans, so we're very transparent with our program in terms of the STIP, the 4-year plan and the 10-year plan, so that we can effectively partner on different issues that may be related to a certain project. And we also provide access to different trainings. To finish, you'll find a slide of the tribal-state relations training, which we're really lucky to have here in the state. This is to train all state employees to understand tribal interests, be aware of tribal sovereignty, and therefore be more effective in partnering on a government-to-government basis. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a couple of questions.
Okay.
First, I'd like to call on Representative Kraft and then Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very interested in this presentation. I have just recently come from city government, and I've learned about some of the ways that MnDOT interacts with city governments. And we have a lot of needs at a city perspective. I'm wondering if you could talk to me about, as you work with tribal governments, what do they see as their transportation infrastructure needs? What are some of their top items that they're asking you for?
Certainly, Chair and Representative Pratt. Some of the tribal interests are around environment, sustainability. The safety is a main concern, pedestrian, bicycle safety, safe routes to school, very important topic, access to employment opportunities on construction projects, access to trainings so that we have a pipeline. We think of this holistically. And also, I would say one of the most important would be the protection of cultural resources along the right-of-way.
Okay, do you have a follow-up or?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So do they, and within our city, we track road quality. Is it the same kind of thing that happens there with tribal governments? And are you tracking the quality of the roads that go through there? How does that work?
Chair Horstein, Representative Pratt. Each tribal nation is sovereign and independent, so each tribe would do it differently. They do have road departments similar to MnDOT. And in tracking, we may exchange information at times. For example, we had a project on Trunk Highway 61, and at the very tip of the arrowhead, there is Portage, Bend of Chippewa, Lake Superior, located there. So this is where we would indeed collaborate to understand where would be the needs, as MnDOT is tracking with, for example, by putting a cell phone on a maintenance truck to see whether there are bumps or issues on the roadway. Then we would look at that and collaborate through on one-on-one coordination to be able to address these potential issues. Or we would, if it's a more general issue, we would bring into the Advocacy Council for Tribal Transportation with the 11 tribal nations.
Thank you.
Okay. Members, I think what we'll do, because our author does have to get back to a committee for a vote, is we'll hold, if you can stick around, we will call on Representative Petersburg and Representative Tabke after the bill presentation. And we do have Representative Keeler here. And members, I will move that House File 235 be laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus transportation policy bill. So that is our motion today. And Representative Keeler, welcome to the committee. Representative Keeler, before you do your presentation, there is a A1 amendment, and it's an author's amendment, and I will move it. House Research did find a small technical issue, and I'll have Mr. Burris explain the amendment.
Mr. Chair and members, the bill has a reference to a federal law, and in reviewing that reference, it turned out that there was a typo. So the amendment would change the reference to be to Section 140 instead of 104 in the U.S. Code.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions about the A1 amendment? Okay, I will move the A1 amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, the motion prevails. Representative Keeler, welcome to the committee. I really appreciate your presence here. I'm not sure if you've had a transportation bill before, so we're excited to hear from you, and I really appreciate your carrying House File 235. So please proceed, and we'll hear your bill, lay it over, and obviously if there's questions of the committee, we'll have those as well. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Hey, Hannah Wash Day. Good morning, members. I saw Representative Petersburg this morning, and he said there's snacks at this committee, so a good morning snack. I'll real quick, kind of to follow up, what this bill does is it just aligns us with the federal opportunity to make our state have a Native American hiring preference when it comes to opportunities with the Department of Transportation. And I want to sit in front of you and tell a story, only because I think stories humanize some of these things. It's kind of a real basic maneuver, but I want to share something that was really important to me about my dad. I grew up in a world that we didn't have a whole lot of opportunity as Native Americans in the state of South Dakota. And my dad and one of his best friends took it upon himself to create the opportunity around building bridges. So he started a business and he hired Native Americans off the reservations to give them a job and skills to be able to grow. It's something that we hear in so many spaces. Our communities need these opportunities. Our reservations often don't have as many opportunities as other urban communities or other opportunities across the state. And what this does is it just provides a preference. It's not a requirement, we can't do that, but it's a preference in hiring. It's working at building that government-to-government relationship with our state and our tribal nations, which I believe is extremely important. And under oath for all of it is our requirement to abide by Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution. And so it's real basic. It opens up the opportunity for partnership and future growth and training and skills for our community members across the state, understanding that Minnesota sits on 100% ceded treaty territory, 11 sovereign nations. This would be huge for our communities. It's not taking anything away from all of you. It's only uplifting and providing basically the boots that a lot of people tell us we need to be able to be successful in our own communities, and also provide opportunities and give examples to our next generation of some of the really wonderful things that we can do. That's basically it in a nutshell. I think we're going to lay it over, but I'm happy to have more conversation. We have the professionals here that do kind of know and understand more about the Department of Transportation, but that's where I will leave it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much for your bill and your presentation and story. And we'll have any questions, but perhaps if there's anything that MnDOT would want to add, this would be a good time for that.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Rudin, welcome. Please state your name for the record.
Eric Rudin with MnDOT Government Affairs. Those of you who have been on the committee before know that we've had this bill around for a few years, and I think we've gotten pretty close to getting it implemented, but we're hopeful that this is the year we can finally adopt this state law to kind of put us in alignment with the federal law in this area. So it will just kind of strengthen our efforts to provide these employment opportunities on and near reservations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Udine. Are there any questions of committee members? I'm sorry? Okay, we're Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and you're right, it has been around for a while, and one of the challenges we have is trying to define what is reasonably expected to commute in the number of miles, and there's a lot of discussion about that. It's already in federal statute or guidelines, whether or not this is actually needed. But is there any guidelines or thoughts on the commissioner and how that miles are going to be determined? Because it leaves it pretty wide open, and it's really the challenge that we have is that for those companies that are trying to figure out whether or not there's a preference or not, it's kind of important to know what the parameters are. Any thoughts in regards to that? Either one.
MnDOT would like to respond?
Chair, Representative, very good question. The definition of near is currently defined in MnDOT policy. And we have established that the federal guidelines define near as a reasonable commuting distance. Now we have to think of the industry this would apply to. There is no legal precedent. So MnDOT policy would define near as 60 miles around reservation boundaries as a reasonable commuting distance for one to earn a living in that line of work.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add, though, it would really be on a case-by-case and project-by-project basis. So MnDOT would consult with the tribe because in the metro area, 30 miles might be a reasonable commuting distance. In greater Minnesota, 2.5 hours might be a reasonable commuting distance for one of these jobs. It really depends on what part of the state you're in. But we are aware that again, in some parts of the state, people will drive 2 hours one way to get to a construction site, and really that's fairly common. So it would be negotiated on a case-by-case, project-by-project basis.
A quick follow-up, Representative.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate that because I think that's part of the discretion that's given. So will each project be given that preferential distance at the time of awarding the bid or negotiating for the bid so that everybody knows at that time, or is that going to be determined after the fact?
Chair, Representative, we would look at a case-by-case basis. So 60 miles would be the radius around the reservation. But then what we would do is during consultation with tribal leaders, the commissioner would have the ability to adjust that radius on a case-by-case basis with each tribal nation.
Mr. Chair,
One last one.
thank you. I'm not sure I got the answer, though. So when will that determination be made, before or after the contracts are given?
Chair, Representative, so the determination is made, near is defined before we let the contract, but however, we will look on that case-by-case basis, so it may be different in the future.
Thank you.
Okay, we have Representative Olson and Tabke and Murphy. Did you do your question yet?
I did, but I can pass now.
Okay. Representative Olson and Murphy.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Chair.
we'll wrap things up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think this is directed towards the individuals from MnDOT. My question is, can you give us kind of a blueprint as to how you would implement such a preference due to the fact that a lot of the projects that we're talking about, MnDOT doesn't create the bridges. They take out contracts, they make bids with companies. So are we just looking at preferences for people who are mowing the median, which I think is a lot less of an employment opportunity than if we're providing preferences to potentially contractors who are employing native tribemen and women, or can you just walk me through this? Because if we just have it in statute that we're providing this preference, but we're not actually doing anything about it, then I have a problem with that.
Chair, Representative, we are mimicking the federal regulations here, as Mr. Rudin stated earlier. we are working on, it is not a quota, it's a preference. So what we're working on is to make sure that the contractors work with the tribal employment representatives to identify potential openings they may have on a project that they were awarded in order to work together. The enforcement would be taken by the MnDOT Office of Civil Rights, which would review that there is an implementation of the program, which could include reviewing whether a contractor has actually contacted the tribe in order to try to discuss potential opportunities on a project.
Okay.
I guess I would just end that, Mr. Chair, by saying that I think that we could do a lot more towards ensuring that this preference is implemented, but based off of your plan.
Thank you. We'll hear from Representative Murphy and then wrap up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mine's a pretty simple question. How does it apply to township and county roads within a reservation?
Chair, Representative, within reservation boundaries, tribal law would kick in. So there's already a tribal employment rights ordinances or tribal employment representative that would often work with the contractor, whether this is a city road, whether this is horizontal or even vertical construction.
And Mr. Chair, if I could jump in, the bill before you today is really for contracts let by the Commissioner of Transportation. So we're just talking about trunk highway projects.
Thank you. Okay, any final comments, Representative Keeler? Did you want, No. Okay, he said, yeah, we're good.
Okay, thank you. Can I address the
Yes,
answer
yes.
a little
Any
bit too?
final
Sorry.
comments?
So it does say in here that it's on or near reservations. So anything that happens on the reservation, a lot of our tribal nations already do Native American hiring. And also we have some Native American owned contractors too. So it's kind of exciting that we're actually growing this industry. And I think it goes back to being able to just have people on the roads and actually learning and working and building their own businesses out of it. And so what we've seen some other states do, which is something that we're not doing here, but to your point, and how do we really implement this, is there's been some states that have absolutely implemented a certain percent of the state budget as they build roads has to go to Native American owned or Native American preference companies as well. That's not what we're doing, but that is just some suggestions that other states have done in the past to be able to put a little bit more teeth into this. So I appreciate you bringing that up. But back to, I guess, the statement, this is all about opportunity. This is all about creating close working relationships with our department and our state agencies and having consultations. That's what this is all about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing this bill. It's really important. We don't think we've had this type of an extensive conversation about tribal affairs, and particularly in the context of this bill. And so it's very significant and important, and I really appreciate your carrying this bill. And so members, again, this might have it's really our intention to sort of package the policy-related bills together this year, separate from finance. You know, that could change. We want to line things up with the Senate. But at this point, the motion is to lay this bill over in a possible policy omnibus bill. So with that, thank you so much again, Representative Keeler, and this bill is laid over. Okay, I think this concludes our conversation about the Office of Tribal Affairs in Indian Country, unless there's any additional questions or comments. Oh, yes, we were in the middle of your line of questioning,
I think there are a couple more, yeah.
Thank you, yes. We'll continue on with this discussion, and then we'll transition over to the Department of Public Safety overview. Proceed, Representative Peterson, I apologize.
I think, no problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is probably more curiosity on my part. I think on one of the slides, you talked about 11% of our transportation infrastructure is within the Indian Country. And I understand, counties and trunk highways are within that. My curiosity is just how many roads are owned, maintained, and operated by the tribal nations themselves? Do we have any idea on what number of miles that is? Or is that too abstract to find out? Curiosity, Mr. Chair.
Chair, Representative, I would have to look back on for the mileage. Each tribal nation is sovereign. So, for example, Red Lake Nation has makes a design and maintains trunk highway. The 11% includes not only the trunk highways, but also overall the infrastructure overall. And I will add that there are three very large land-based reservations around Bemidji, and these are Red Lake Nation, White Earth Nation, and the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe. So within those reservations, there will be a higher mileage that we work on together.
All right, now, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just think that's important to note because, just as townships and others are looking for money for their roads and bridges, everybody else will be as well, and it's kind of important to know which ones are responsible for where. So thank you.
Thanks, Representative Petersburg. We do have a question from Representative Tapke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In recent years, there have been issues and concerns so the Shakopee, Mdewakanton, and Sioux community is in my district, at least partially in my district, and the chair had been working with MnDOT on a variety of different projects, and one of them was advocating for, it was Highway 101 in the West Metro that was impacting burial mounds, and it was not necessarily respecting the burial mounds and what was there and the ancestors and so what has changed since that time of making sure that we are respecting other cultures and heritage and making sure that we are doing what is right and those kinds of things to where we are today? Because I know there have been a lot of changes that have been made as to how we handle those kinds of things. And so could you kind of give some context and elaborate on that a bit?
Chair, Representative, we have adapted our processes, internal processes. So that is especially so I should state that Highway 101 was not a MnDOT project, but concerning that matter, we have processes in place in order to include not only trunk highways, but also state-funded projects so that there is consultation between our cultural resources personnel and the tribal historic preservation officer. So this is done at an early stage so that we can make sure that we're not impacting it. There are so many cultural resources in the state of Minnesota that it may happen someday, and we have conversations with tribal leaders very often on that topic, especially with the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, which unites the 11 tribal nations, or 10 tribal nations in Minnesota and the Upper Sioux community. Another thing that we're preparing is to host with the Bois Forte Tribal Nation and MIAC, a summit that is specific to cultural resources to be able to really identify and continue to work together on those processes. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? We have a little bit of time here if we need it.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Sorry, but
Mr. Redeen.
Just since you have a minute, Levi Brown, who is the director of our Office of Tribal Affairs, has now been able to log in. I think he was having some
Okay.
issues.
Yeah, we had a little bit of a technical glitch earlier. So
if
he
you'd
has,
like, he could
absolutely, if
introduce
he's
himself.
prepared some testimony, we'd love to hear from him, and then we'll take any questions after that. And then we will hear from DPS. Okay, Levi?
Yeah, thank you, Chair and committee members. Just want to say thank you to my coworkers for filling in for me. I want to kind of touch back on a couple of questions that were asked. The first one about, how MnDOT has done its policies, how we've restructured how we make decisions going forward, working with tribes, and especially around cultural resources, is we've put a tremendous amount of time into making sure that our planning, when we project 5-10 years out, that those conversations are being had with tribal nations, especially those cultural resource staffs who have that expertise, who know where some of these burial sites are that maybe we don't know where they're at. And in the long run, that saves us, and the state a lot of money, so because we obviously have learned our lesson in some, whether it's 101 or Mission Creek, we're getting better at it. And I think that's when we look at, talking to folks and other government officials, want to be able to tell them we're learning from our mistakes. And so I'm glad that question was asked. As for how many miles on each reservation, I 100% we can get that information to you. We do have that. I don't want to throw a number out there and be completely wrong. But Adrian did a good job of recapping. Size really dictates that. And one of the things I can say about the tribe, especially the larger ones in northern Minnesota, is they're very cognizant with their local partners about who's doing what. And even with the new discretionary type of federal funding, they're really looking at partnerships because the way that funding is kind of cut up is tribes and local units of government have a really kind of more of an advantage over DOT when they apply for some of these funds. And I think that those partnerships will be there. And I think a lot of it is they're going to be ahead of the curve on partnerships versus I think we'll be more of a supportive role on that local infrastructure, their representative around, who's paying for what, who's doing what. I think they're really looking hard about their partnerships. And then I think Representative asked a question about ditch, kind of like what's the long-term employment and the benefit, making sure it's not just mowing and these laboring jobs. I think that's really the match, is to get the federal and state language to match so that, that it's not just ditch mowing or doing some of the laboring jobs, that there's real investment in our workforce and development, especially in the rural areas where the tribal populations are much higher per the demographics and represent a lot higher percentage on that. So I appreciate you guys' time. And again, I want to thank my colleagues for filling in my technical difficulties there. But thank you. And I'll maybe pause and leave it at that if there's any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Any additional questions or comments? Okay. Well, MnDOT, thank you. Looking forward to any additional conversation about this if necessary. The committee can feel free to contact you. And we'll move on now to an overview from the Department of Public Safety. Members, this is the third area of state government that we have jurisdiction over. We've heard from MnDOT a little bit. We've heard from the Met Council. And now we have the Commissioner of Public Safety with us. And we oversee, the Public Safety Committee has quite a bit of jurisdiction as well. But because there are several interactions with transportation, specifically that we have in the Department of Public Safety, the State Patrol, Office of Traffic Safety. We've already heard, now the connections we have with driver and vehicle services. So there's a lot of interface with this committee and the Department of Public Safety. And so that's why we have the overview today. We'll hear from the commissioner, we'll hear from others, and then entertain questions. And of course, we'll be adjourning at 10 a.m. So I believe we have enough time here, but members will keep a list if you have questions. Commissioner, welcome. Congratulations on your new job. And maybe before you get into your testimony, maybe give us a little bit of background. You have a very, very strong resume. You're very well prepared for this position. We're glad to have you. And welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name for the record is Bob Jacobson. And good morning, Chair Hornstein, Vice Chair Tabke, Lead Petersburg, and members of the committee. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here in front of you today. As the chair mentioned, I am the new Commissioner of Public Safety. I am in my third week. I started on January 2nd, sworn in. And I just want you all to know that I'm very honored and humbled by the opportunity to be in this position. Our staff has heard this before, and some of you have also perhaps heard this, but I can guarantee I'm an epic failure at one thing and maybe others, and that's retirement. This is my fifth position since retiring as a commissioner, first of all, the Chief of Police and Director of Public Safety for the City of New Brighton. Over 32 years there, the last 16 plus of that as Director of Public Safety, where I oversaw emergency management, fire operations, and certainly the law enforcement side. I retired for the first time. Again, I'm not very good at this, and I came back and started teaching and training for the Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association. And really, my heart was in service with the Chiefs of Police Association to provide training on leadership was the focus. Also, resilience and wellness training throughout the state of Minnesota. I got around to many of your areas to speak with your chiefs and your command staffs. I retired. I thought that was it. And then the Department of Human Services called and asked if I would do an interim position in the Inspector General's office. I did that for a short period of time, retired, ended up coming back out of retirement to help the city of Stillwater. Again, they were in need of an interim position for a police chief. I really thought that was it this time, and we're planning our vacation to Arizona, and then I got called again for a second stint at the Department of Human Services. And as I was there, the position for Commissioner of Public Safety came up. And this was a position that I looked at, that I felt in my heart, that this was something I really would love the opportunity to be able to serve, to continue to serve on this level for all of our state. And again, I'm appreciative to the governor and the lieutenant governor for the opportunity to be able to do that. So again, but just know I'm honored and very humbled, and I appreciate your confidence, Chair Hornstein, and I will do my very best for the state of Minnesota in my time here. Just a little bit of an overview today on the Department of Public Safety. As you all know, and Chair Hornstein talked about this, DPS is a large state agency. We have 11 different operating divisions, over 2,100 employees. And as mentioned, we are broken into two different really legislative committees and between transportation and public safety. And today, of course, the focus is on the transportation side. That includes the Minnesota State Patrol, the Office of Traffic Safety, Driver and Vehicle Services, Office of Pipeline Safety Administration, and related services, which we'll talk about today too. Just a little bit about the history of the Department of Public Safety. You can see Department of Public Safety was created in 1969, but you could also see a big part of that is the State Patrol, and they began in 1929. The State Patrol provides for safe and efficient movement of traffic, of course. We assist motorists at crashes. We partner with city and county agencies. We do everything, including inspecting school buses and commercial vehicles. We have over 850 full-time sworn and non-sworn personnel. And of course, our State Patrol is led by Colonel Matt Langer. Some of the services that the State Patrol provides, you can see on the slides, many different services. Our troopers responded to over 25,000 crashes last year alone, and over 76,000 motorist assists. We have an aviation unit that's used for everything from pursuits to search and rescue missions. And the State Patrol, as you know, is in charge of Capitol security, and we also have a commercial vehicle enforcement division. Some of the achievements for the State Patrol, and there are many, but just to include a few that kind of stand out. This one really stood out to me. The State Patrol wrote over 1,150 citations for speeds at over 100 miles per hour in the state. I had to look at that bullet point a couple of times to let that soak in. We also made over 5,400 DWI arrests. We participate in HEAT, which stands for Highway Enforcement for Aggressive Traffic. Twin Cities metro area, we had over 6,000 traffic stops related to that. In Greater Minnesota, over 20,000 traffic stops. We also had a focus on street racing enforcement in the spring, including our helicopter and airplanes. Total stops during those enforcement efforts, nearly 2,000 traffic stops, several speeding citations, DWI and DWI arrests. The next section I want to talk about or cover very quickly is the Office of Traffic Safety. Kind of staying with that theme of why we're here, for safety in our roadways. Office of Traffic Safety designs, implements public education. They do traffic law enforcement programs, again, always with the goal of reducing crashes and deaths and injuries on our roads. And again, we believe in reducing crashes and making our roadways safe for everyone. The Office of Traffic Safety is led by Director Mike Hansen. Office of Traffic Safety also coordinates the statewide enforcement, education, and awareness campaigns, the Click It or Ticket that you've probably heard about, distracted driving and speed campaigns, and we also collect data and analyze crash data statewide. Some of the achievements for the Office of Traffic Safety. Number one, fatal crashes were down 10% in 2022. So that's a number of lives that have been saved through a number of our enforcement and education efforts. We also granted out over $10 million in school bus stop arm camera grants, and we helped lead the state's Towards Zero Death program. One interesting statistic, we help fund 25 DWI or traffic safety officers across the state. Those are full-time officers that do nothing but traffic safety, and those 25 officers and deputies made nearly 2,000 impaired driving arrests in 2022. Next section I'm going to talk about is the Office of Pipeline Safety. As you know, that falls under the State Fire Marshal's office, and this committee has jurisdiction. It's led by our Fire Marshal, Jim Smith, who is also here today. The Office of Pipeline Safety inspects natural gas, propane, hazardous liquid pipelines, and as you know, investigates leaks and accidents. One of the things I'll just tell you about the Office of Pipeline Safety, that is an office that is very near and dear to my heart. Some of you have been around perhaps long enough to remember the Mounds View pipeline explosion, July 6th of 1986. There was a rupture in a pipeline in the city of Mounds View. It was later determined that that was ignited through that gas leak by a vehicle that was delivering papers. I was a young, relatively young, still had hair, it still had color to it. In 1986, when the call came in of an explosion in the city of Mounds View. As I left our police department in those early morning hours, you could see that there was a huge explosion, a fire in the city of Mounds View. And I was part of the first officers that were on the scene for that incident, not knowing that it was a pipeline that had leaked and exploded at that time. But we started to evacuate residents in that area, and I helped assist two of the victims that eventually passed away. As that incident was investigated again, it was determined that there was a leak in the pipeline, which at the end of the day helped create the Office of Pipeline Safety. And so I feel very proud that while I responded to a very difficult scene and a tragic scene with the loss of 2 lives, I was there to assist those victims, but more than that, something good came out of that, being the Office of Pipeline Safety. So very proud of that. Some of the main programs that are out of the Office of Pipeline Safety, again, we use risk-based methods for our scheduling pipeline inspections. If accidents occurs, we certainly investigate and try to find the probable violations if there were any. We also have a very robust prevention program, the Call Before You Dig law, and we work to educate homeowners and, of course, contractors to make sure that we don't have repeats of some of those things. Some of the achievements in Office of Pipeline Safety, we spent more than 1,000 hours doing inspections across the state, and certainly we send out inspection results and enforcement letters. And again, they're very busy, but not always a very well-known part of the Department of Public Safety. I'll finish with driver and vehicle services. As you know, driver and vehicle services handles credentials, driving exams. It is led by our director, Pan Zhang, who is here today. And I know he's been in front of your committee already. In 2022, for services, the DVS, we served more than 10 million customers, collected over 2 billion, and processed thousands of transactions. So as you know, very busy and active division of the Department of Public Safety. Those services are provided by 93 different exam locations around the state of Minnesota. Some of the highlights, again, as mentioned, we reopened all those exams. We had over 5,000 same-day license and IDs since October 3rd, so we are serving the public. And we have some enhanced online services, including online appointments, knowledge testing. We processed over 1.5 million vehicle titles, 5.5 million vehicle registrations during last year. For a number of exams, we had 175,000 road tests, nearly 400,000 knowledge tests. And just so you know, those 175,000 road tests were the most ever completed in 1 year for the Division of Vehicle Services. And in 2022, we also work with third-party contractors. We had 75 locations that were doing some of the proctoring knowledge. So we're trying to get as many people as we can involved to make sure that we're serving our public. And then last, we'll talk a little bit about our internal support division. We don't talk about this very often, but we have our fiscal administrative services that help with our budgeting and accounting. Our Office of Communications, which has been extremely busy providing public information, department programming initiatives. They prepare a lot of public education materials. Our Human Resources section, again, the challenge for everyone is recruitment and retention. Our human resources are very innovative and trying to help us increase the performance and work with our DPS workforce. Our internal affairs, we thought it was worth noting, we have a section dedicated to internal affairs. So for example, the State Patrol does not do their own internal affairs. We have a separate section that does that, separate from the State Patrol. It's a small team, but they do very important work and is key to accountability. And with that, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Again, I will reiterate, I am humbled and honored to have been here to be here today and to be able to serve as your next Commissioner of Public Safety. And with that, we'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Jacobson. I really appreciate how well organized this is, especially, keeping track of the various functions and divisions within the DPS is very helpful because it can be, there's a lot going on here and a lot that we have to track. So I appreciate how well organized this is. And we have members for your questions over here. We have the division directors, Colonel Langer is here. So if you have some very specific questions about a particular division or function of DPS, we have the folks here, which I also appreciate. And a nice little fact, we have a nice connection over the years with Colonel Langer, particularly in traffic safety. We did a lot of work together on the hands-free cell phone bill. But a little known fact, which I think is important for this committee, he has a master's in public policy. So Colonel Langer, I appreciate that. So members, questions. Representative West is first on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I have a feeling Colonel Langer will be needed to answer these because they're about State Patrol recruiting. A lot of law enforcement has had trouble recruiting, and in your presentation, you said 47 cadets graduated this year, and you expect that to be down to 36 next year. I'm curious do we have a trend line of how many cadets were graduating before that, just in very recent years? And then is there a gap that you're trying to fill? Like, is this enough cadets graduating from the academy?
Colonel Langer, welcome. Good to see you again.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Matt Langer. I have the honor and privilege of serving as Chief of the State Patrol. It's good to be back. Representative West, Mr. Chair, Representative West, I appreciate the question. Brass tacks, recruitment's really hard right now. It's hard across many job sectors, specifically in policing. And so what we've done over the past couple of years is we've actually been required to have 2 academies instead of 1. That doubles the cost of obviously hiring people because 2 academies is more expensive than 1. So in a perfect world, we'd have 1 academy that was filled with 60 to 70 people, and that would allow us to climb up to what we have funding available in terms of filling all of the vacant sworn positions in the State Patrol. So on any given day at headquarters, we're having this conversation about what we do differently, what we do better to recruit in this really difficult environment. And in some ways, we think, geez, we're really struggling. And then we read articles like the Los Angeles Police Department has 22 people in their current academy, and they're projecting 600 retirements. So on one hand, we're really struggling. On the other hand, we're doing really well. We have a strong reputation where we're still able to recruit people and they want to come work for the State Patrol, but make no mistake about it, it's really difficult. Answering your question directly, this committee has been really supportive of the State Patrol and our staffing needs. A couple of years ago, there was funding for 62 additional new positions, many of those to come to the state capitol and many of those to work across the state of Minnesota on the road and doing crash reconstruction and education. And we have been working as hard as we can to basically stay even and fill the normal attrition with people retiring and the normal attrition of people choosing different careers. We haven't seen a mass exodus. We're very thankful for that, but we're struggling and working very hard to sort of stay even rather than grow. But we also have a lot of opportunities and ideas that we intend on implementing to try to make some progress.
Representative West, did you have a follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that very thorough answer. I'm just curious on, so we're looking at 11 decline from last year. Is that like a linear decline, or is that based on previous years? Are we seeing an accelerating rate of decline, or is it linear?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Representative, so we have all the data, and I'd be happy to have an offline conversation in great detail. It's been, the trend line is down, but it sort of spikes in peculiar ways. So we hire for LEADO, the Law Enforcement Training and Opportunity, which allows us to hire anyone with a 2 or 4 year degree from an accredited university in any discipline. And then we hire them and we put them through skills, they're post-eligible, and they enter our academy. That has been our saving grace over the past 10 to 15 years to try to help fill vacancies, because they just don't, the applicant pool in the traditional side of people pursuing law enforcement degrees, it does not exist for us to be able to be successful. So LEADO's been a great success in many ways, but just when you see a big applicant pool in LEADO, you know, when I have 300-400 people apply for 15 positions, the very next year you'll see it go down to like 80. We're recruiting in a really tough job market. Unemployment is fantastically low in the state of Minnesota. There's things about policing that are difficult. You can't do it from home. There are inherent, inflexibilities in the job because we do need troopers at night and on the weekends and on holidays. So we're competing in a very tough environment for even LEADO to get people to come our way. At the same time, every year we hire fantastic people that, got a degree. We just hired a LEADO candidate that got his law degree and hasn't quite taken the bar exam, but graduated and said, I don't want to do this for my career. And he's working the road as a state trooper, and he's very successful thus far. So just as one example of how we're trying to be intentionally recruiting people from diverse backgrounds other than law enforcement, because it makes us better and because it's our only option right now.
Thank you. Representative Kraft.
Thank you, excuse me, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Commissioner Jacobson, thank you for your, excuse me, thank you for your service, and I hope you're enjoying your retirement. Mike, I have a couple of questions. The statistics on the number of people apprehended and things and stops and seem very impressive. And I really appreciate the education. I'm interested in the outcomes and what we're seeing over time relative to reduction in fatalities. I saw the 1 year change, but reduction in fatalities, serious injuries, like how are we doing on those outcomes over time?
Commissioner, and you're gonna phone for help too.
Thank you, Chair and Representative. I'll certainly pass it to Colonel Langer, but again, State Patrol here and all of us in the Department of Public Safety are here about safety and reduction in crime, reduction in crashes are our ultimate goal in this. And we partner internally with our Office of Traffic Safety to cultivate those statistics, to find out where we can put our resources best used to reduce those crashes and those personal injury accidents, and certainly those fatalities. We do, try to do the education along with the enforcement to make sure to get that done. And I think we have been successful, obviously, in 2022. We can always do better. And we certainly did see an increase, I think, in fatalities in 2021. The ultimate reasons for that, I'm not sure. Office of Traffic Safety may be, but again, the battle continuing to be, all those traffic statistics that we see are a person or persons in fatalities and crashes. And again, the ultimate goal is to reduce those. Director Hansen, would you like to address some of that as well?
Just very briefly, Mr. Chair, representative members. The first number I would start with is 440. That's the number of lives that were lost on Minnesota roads last year, and the vast majority, if not all of those, as the result of a completely preventable act by a driver. We know what the big four causes of these serious and fatal crashes are. It's speed, it's impairment, it is the very small number of folks who still do not use a seatbelt, and it's distraction. And all of our programs are targeted at addressing those four primary causes. Now, through the Towards Zero Deaths program, we use a variety of tools with that that address the engineering and the infrastructure, but a lot of this comes down to human behavior. The positive trend, the 10% reduction last year, that is good news. And I give a lot of credit to Colonel Langer and some of the things that the State Patrol has done, as well as a lot of our other very active and engaged law enforcement partners across the state. But our Office of Communications and our outreach and our education efforts are also part of that. But we have a lot of work to do because 440, one is unacceptable. 440 is just off the charts unacceptable. And we have a lot of work to do to get that back down. And that 440 is still well above our 5-year trend line. If we go back to 2017, when I believe the number was 358, that was the lowest number of fatalities Minnesota had seen since 1944. So, we had made progress up to that, but then COVID arrived and the wheels kind of came off some of the traffic safety issues along with some of the public safety issues that we're struggling with now. So, Colonel, would you have anything to add to that?
Mr. Chair, Representative, I'll just add on to what Director Hansen articulated. So in 2022, the State Patrol intentionally embarked on several projects, and many of you heard whether it was HEAT or Project 2022, the street racing, and really our intentional focus with HEAT was on speed enforcement. So when you look at calendar year 2022, the women and men of the Minnesota State Patrol increased their traffic stops by about 13%. They increased their impaired driving enforcement arrests, particularly with alcohol, a rather astounding 28%. And then you see a 10% reduction in fatalities. 85% of the enforcement work of the Minnesota State Patrol was on speed and distraction and impairment and seatbelts, of course. As Director Hansen pointed out, those are the four things that data tells us kills people. Those are the four things that we have for several years as an organization focused on. And so that's really been intentional for us. We're not going to get there by enforcement alone. We won't get there by education alone. It's both together. The context, I think, is also really important. So 10% reduction is with context in mind, and Director Hansen will tell us. I got a phone call from NHTSA this week, and I have a meeting this afternoon. NHTSA is asking me what happened in Minnesota to drive a reduction because very few other states, very few in the country saw a reduction in 2022. So 440 is way too many, but at the same time, we're moving in the right direction. We just want to continue that momentum and focus on the things that we know are killing people, because whether you're the librarian from St. Kate's killed in South Minneapolis, or you're a person killed north of Red Lake Nation on a 2-lane highway, it's someone who died that we can try to work hard to prevent, but it's the local cops, it's the county deputies, it's the state troopers, it's education, it's everybody working together on this is what's going to drive that synergy to get back to the progress we had. Historically, Minnesota is about number 2. Massachusetts somehow always eclipses us on the deaths per 100 million miles VMT. We're number 2 often in the country, but we can still do a lot better.
Thank you, Colonel. Representative Kraft, a follow-up.
I don't have a follow-up, but I have a question now
Sure.
on pipeline, Office of Pipeline Safety.
Sure.
If I may. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I appreciate this education because I didn't know much about this division. So a couple of questions. One is, it sounds like that you would inspect all natural gas and then hazardous liquid pipelines. I'd just like a little clarification. What falls under the category of hazardous liquid pipelines? And then I'm also interested, what have you found in your inspections? How often are there issues? Like, what are some of the results of the inspection process?
Welcome. Okay, go ahead, and then we'll have some other experts here. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Well, thank you, Chair Hornstein, Representative. I was just going to say, in honor of my less than 3 weeks' experience here at the Department of Public Safety, I would invite Office of Pipeline to answer those questions. Thank you.
Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Jim Smith, and I am the State Fire Marshal and the Director of Office of Pipeline Safety. To answer your question, Representative, the Office of Pipeline Safety regulates all 68,000 miles of pipeline in the state of Minnesota. We have a damage prevention team that works with the operators of those pipelines to make sure that their pipeline is safe during our annual inspections of those pipelines. We do not have testing material per se. It is incumbent upon the operators to prove that they have followed the regulations set forth by PHMSA, which is the Pipeline Hazardous Material Safety Association. So we do inspect the pipeline. We focus our attention more on the operators of those pipelines to make sure that they are in compliance with what is required of them to inspect pipelines. Does that answer your question, sir?
Representative Kraft.
Mr. Chair, it's helpful, but a couple of things. If you could talk about, hazardous liquids. What are some of those hazardous liquids that flow through pipelines in Minnesota? And then I guess part of my question is on data. Like, how often in your inspections do you find that there are issues in pipeline? The outcomes of the inspections?
Mr. Chair, Representative, I don't have the specific data in front of me to answer the question on what is the frequency of violations. To answer the question on hazardous material, to simplify what a hazardous material is, it's anything that can jump out at you and hurt you. So it's gas, which can be an asphyxiant, gas vapor, I should say, and it's any type of liquid product that is dangerous to humans or the environment.
Representative Kraft.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for continuing on this, but I'm new to this, and so, I would assume a liquid like that would be like oil, or are there other things like that? I'm just, I know this is a basic question, but I'm just, be basic with me, please.
Mr. Chair, Representative, sure. It is primarily oil. There are gas pipelines that run through the state, and you see products such as hydrogen, liquid petroleum, LPG, LNG going through the state. To clarify, we regulate up to a structure. Once it hits the meter at that structure, that becomes the property of the supplier. So anything before that, transmission lines, distribution lines, it falls under our jurisdiction. But yes, you are correct with oil, gas, gasoline, and vapors, nitrogen, hydrogen, things like that.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those questions. Next on our list, Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Commissioner Jacobson, thank you for being here, and welcome to your latest pre-retirement position here. I am also kind of in that position too. I'm technically supposed to be retired as well. Well, but over the years, I've been on Transportation Committee since 2013, and the challenges we've had work with DPS, and they're not challenges with DPS, it's challenges with the systems and so forth that have been around the driver's license systems and titles and so forth with first legacy system and then MnLARS and now the latest program, which actually is working very well. I have a question that you may or may not be able to answer today, and it's just in regards to, we have now implemented the statute allowing for kiosks for allowing people to get driver's licenses and other titles around. I'm curious as to know how the implementation and installation is going, and if we have any data on that yet. And if that's something for a future meeting, that's fine. But I'm just curious on just an overall top level review on how that's working.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, again, in recognition of coming out of retirement for the 5th time, joining you in that club and having been here for about 3 weeks, I know that driver and vehicle services has certainly become focused on customer service and becoming more adept at being flexible and being able to deliver those services. And I know that Director Zhang has been working very hard on those issues. And with the chair's permission, I'll pass it over to Director Zhang to address some more of those questions in detail.
Thank you. Welcome back to the committee, Director Zhang. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pong Zhang, Director of the Driver and Vehicle Services Division. Mr. Chair, Rep. Petersburg. The kiosk project has been successfully implemented, at least the phase 1. We have 2 kiosks, one here in South St. Paul and one in Rochester. We have transactions coming out of both of them. Like any project, we had to work out some kinks, but we're very happy to share that those have been installed. We are starting to talk about how we add additional kiosks into the ecosystem, and we're working through that. I don't have the actual stats. I'm happy to share that at a later time. Thank you.
Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Zhang, for that information. How are the public accepting it? Are they happy with it? Have there been any issues with usage? And then that's my final question.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Rep. Petersburg. We haven't had any feedback from customers, and so that's something that we can try to tap into. Maybe get some direct feedback from customers after they utilize the system. We do know the transactions are coming through, and so that is a good indication that they are being received well.
Thank you, Representative Petersburg. Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question involves the transportation of hazardous materials. So whoever would be best, maybe Colonel Langer might be best capable of answering this question for me. But this last spring, my father was pulling out of his field with an anhydrous ammonia tank, about 1,000 gallons of anhydrous, and one of the very few commercial inspectors that we have in the state happened to find him and said, you know what, sir, you're supposed to have a DOT inspected pickup truck with a DOT registered number in order to haul X amount of gallons worth of anhydrous ammonia. Now, my father has been farming for 42 years now, and this is the first time he'd ever heard about it. We're talking about in the last 40 years since my father first bought a tractor in 1979, he had an International Harvester 1066, hauled 45 gallons of diesel fuel was what the entire capacity of that was. Now we're looking at tractors in 2023 that hold 400 gallons of diesel fuel. We've got independent farmers, small-time farmers who have these large capacity pieces of equipment where you're carrying wagons that have 1,000 gallons of diesel fuel in them. You've got 1,000 gallons of anhydrous ammonia, and you're looking at a potential $75 registration for a DOT number, $125 inspection. You've got independent farmers, small-time guys. These aren't big guys. Who have 2, 3, 4 pickup trucks and 2 or 3 or 4 semi trucks. So that starts to become really arduous. Most of the big guys, the cooperatives, the guys who are hauling 20,000, doing 20,000 acres that they're rolling over, they have DOT inspections, they have all this stuff. But the small guys with 1,000 or less acres, like my family rolls over, it becomes really arduous. So my question is, what are some potential solutions as capacities are increasing exponentially in order to solve this so we don't have so much regulation or so much problems with our small-town farmers, the family farm, which we're attempting in the state to culture and promote, as opposed to the guys who have all the big tractors, all the big money, and 20,000 acres that they roll over?
Colonel Langer.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Representative Olson, I appreciate the question, and just because I feel compelled to say this, so my wife grew up on a dairy farm, and my late father-in-law had never had a problem kind of pinning my ears back on his perspective as a relatively small dairy farm in St. Peter with some crops on the side. So I have a perspective and an affinity for the work that happens in greater Minnesota, particularly with the farmers. It's not an occupation that's for the faint of heart, for sure, whether I've been on sugar beet farms in northwest Minnesota or my own experience with the family farm in my family. To answer your question, the challenge for us often is how we remain in conformance with the federal regulations. And so, Representative, I'm happy to have conversations, bring Captain John Olson with, who's our subject matter expert on commercial vehicle enforcement. But as it stands right now, hauling the anhydrous ammonia or pulling a trailer of anhydrous ammonia because of that extremely dangerous substance being pulled, the requirement is that the truck that's pulling it is inspected purely from a safety perspective. I know that brings sort of a bureaucratic tone to the person who's done that work for decades and decades and has done those trips hundreds of times without any issue. But the biggest challenge for us, as you'll find, and we can gladly help find solutions where there are them, is remaining in conformance with the federal regulation, with the state law. But I'm happy to meet with you and bring our team with to visit with you and the perspective you have from your own experience.
Representative Wilson.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Colonel Langer. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we could get that conversation going, because my father's been farming for 42 years. We didn't know about this. So I imagine there's at least 2 other farmers in this state who are doing the exact same thing as what we're doing. And small-time farmers, we want to do it the right way. We want to do it the safe way. We just need to know whether it's better promotion of, hey, you guys need to do this, or something else that we can do. I'd like to have that conversation.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair, Representative, we'll get that scheduled through LA.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. Representative Murphy, then Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Jacobson. My question has to do with, since 1986 and your pipeline, public safety, how effective has that been at reducing explosions?
That's a great question.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative. We'll call up our fire marshal again to talk about that. But again, at the end of the day, we're all about safety, whether it's on the roadways or in our pipelines. And I know that we've put a tremendous amount of resources and effort into that. And with the chair's permission, I'll pass it off to our fire marshal.
Mr. Smith.
Mr. Chair, Representative, thank you for that question. We have on the, we call it MnOps, Minnesota Office of Pipeline Safety, have invested a lot of time and personnel in damage prevention, because we feel that if we get on the front side, as opposed to being reactive to a leak, a break, or anything like that, that doesn't help the industry, it doesn't help the citizens in Minnesota. So we have invested a lot of time and energy with our personnel on the damage side. That has significantly reduced the amount of accidents that have occurred on pipelines. We still have issues within the state with derelict lines, pipelines, whatever like that, that are not used anymore. And one of the issues that we are running into is if they run in close proximity to the actual line that is now being used, when the locator goes out, it's sometimes difficult to ascertain which line they are marking. We are still working with the industries to map out those abandoned lines. But by and large, we have seen a large reduction in leaks across the state. Our goal is to change the culture within the industry and make sure that every employee of every organization understands how important it is to do their job correctly and safely, because it impacts so many other people throughout the state.
Follow-up?
I was just curious, how many? I mean, is it, if you'd find a leak during a year, is that rare? If you find 4 or 10? What type of, how often would you actually find a problem that could lead to an explosion?
Mr. Chair, Representative, we do not necessarily see on a frequent basis a malfunction in a system. What we normally see is something that dovetails off of a mismarking. So it's punctured by a backhoe or, you know, digging or something like that. And we see a couple of those a month. And the size of the line is varying. Usually it's a very small line, you know, residential or distribution line, something like that. But it's typically seen with excavators that inadvertently hit that line.
Okay. I did have one question for Mr.
Please.
Langer, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
All right.
absolutely.
This is a quick one. Is there, for Mr. Colonel Langer, is there any change in the retirement age of highway patrolmen? And do you see that, are some retiring early, and maybe why?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Representative, so a great conversation that's tracked by a lot of your colleagues in this body and the other body. The current retirement opportunities for State Patrol, and this isn't exclusive to State Patrol, it tends to be across the police pension system. Your first opportunity for normal retirement is 50, traditional opportunity is 55. State law requires state troopers to be retired at age 60. The question I think you're asking is about attrition. We're seeing people sometimes shift into completely different career fields. A great trooper just retired not long ago. We were hoping he'd become one of our next pilots, had a great military career. He's retiring and buying a travel trailer with his wife, and they're gonna sell all their belongings and move around the country. Just as a recent example, we haven't seen a mass exodus. We're seeing most troopers pull and push all the way through till that normal retirement age of 55. If they exit earlier than that, it's tending to be just a completely different career shift based on what they want to do. We lose a couple troopers once in a while. We lost one to Little Falls Police Department. We lost one to Mounds View. They kind of developed an affinity and a passion for doing police work that isn't in the mission of the Minnesota State Patrol, and they've made those moves. At the same time, we have 12 people in our academy right now that came from other law enforcement agencies as a lateral opportunity to come to the State Patrol.
Okay.
Does it have anything to do with crime or the need to be, for any medical reasons that they would leave, that they didn't want to adhere to something that was being asked of them? Is any of that happening? Is it?
Mr. Chair, Representative, if I think what you're asking, the missions that the State Patrol has been called into over the past few years have been super challenging for us as an organization. There's been a couple of conversations I have had with troopers, particularly those that work in greater Minnesota, that just tell me point blank, I don't ever want to come back to the Metro for any reason. I don't work there, I don't live there, I don't play there, I don't shop there. There's a reason why I live in greater Minnesota. There's a reason why I came to the State Patrol. It certainly wasn't to work in the city of Minneapolis. And I have a healthy respect for that, because they chose their life around the belief that they'd be working and living where they choose to live. But it has not been a problem for us, other than some of those one-off conversations where we have good, candid conversations about why they feel that way and how they're thinking. And a lot of it is because they love where they live and they love where they work. And there's a reason why they chose to be where they are. And the same is true for those who are in the Metro. They love where they live and they love where they work.
Thank you.
Okay. We're going to have two more questions, and then we'll wrap up for the day. Representative Cagle and Representative Petersburg. Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry I missed most of this. I had a bill up in State Gov, but I was just looking through the slides, and the 5,434 DWI arrests, do you parcel those out between alcohol and drugs? And do you know how, what the percentage is?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Representative, a great question. Yes, we can parse that out. In my previous testimony, I said last year our alcohol impaired driving arrests were up about 28%. Our drug impaired driving arrests were actually down. We find this to be interesting geographically in some districts, like I'm thinking of one in northern Minnesota. They have sometimes almost 50% of their impaired driving is drug and not alcohol. But the phenomenon that I know Director Hansen and all of us have struggled with is it's polydrug use. is sort of the challenge. And so we're well prepared to meet those challenges. It will require a lot of education and more training, particularly with legislation that may or may not pass this year that's on the docket. But we saw last year interesting growth in alcohol and an interesting reduction in drug. I can get you all the breakdown, and I will be happy to send it to you.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair?
Representative Cagle.
And, you know, I think maybe I'm hopping on my soapbox and everybody knows where I'm going with this, but maybe Mr. Hultofter-Hyde, and I can sit and talk, because I know, you know, there's people that have only drug-related DUIs who are then forced to get breathalyzers in their car, and so they can still be using drugs and be impaired while they're driving. And blow clean on those breathalyzers. And so I think that's something that we need to address, especially if there are other legislation that gets passed this year. And then how we really make sure that we're looking for impaired drivers and making sure that the punishment fits the crime. So thank you.
Thank you. And we'll have our last question from Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Colonel Langer, this is also to yours area of expertise as well. And earlier we heard from the tribal nations and so forth, which got me thinking that there are a lot of connections between the State Patrol and other entities that do law enforcement, with cities, sheriffs, tribal offices, and I think even railroads have their own law enforcement. How are they recognized, and how do you work with them in relation to a lot of these problems? And is there an issue in regards to authority?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Representative, so yes, I think there are challenges related to authority, both with some tribal nations and also with the railroad police in Minnesota. I'll give an example that I think is rather recent. I had an opportunity to make my second visit to Red Lake Nation and be part of a meeting with their tribal council about a few different issues, but we spent time talking about traffic safety issues on Red Lake Nation. And it was particularly about commercial vehicle enforcement and whether drivers were knowingly overweight and cutting through the Red Lake Nation property that was damaging their roads in a disparate way. And also about how we can work together with the tribal PD to do some enforcement work that's viewed as favorable by the community and not viewed as the State Patrol coming in and sort of guarding the border of the reservation and creating a perception that we're there with ill intent, but rather working together on an issue that the tribal nation is bringing to us that we can help collaboratively solve, and also offering training on commercial vehicle enforcement 101 so that the tribal PD officers can have some expertise in that so they can do some enforcement work on their own. We're looking at expanding that. We've worked with our tribal liaison at DPS to have conversations about that. And actually, there is a conversation coming up at the BCA specific about the resources that DPS has with policing and how that can be relevant specifically toward tribal nations on a myriad of issues, traffic safety being just one of those.
Representative Petersburg.
Just quick follow-up, and then in regards to railroads, I'm not sure what authority they have and whether there's cross-jurisdictional areas and whether that's an issue or not.
Mr. Chair, Representative, yes, it is an issue in Minnesota, and I know actually the chief of the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad has pursued some legislation, worked with the Chiefs Association, and has previously met with DPS about the challenges of how those federal railroad police officers are not defined as peace officers in the state of Minnesota. And that seems like it should be an awfully simple solution that gets really complicated really quickly in the construct of policing in Minnesota.
I guess just in what way? Is that difficult?
Mr. Chair, Representative, just succinctly, they don't have a jurisdiction that they fall under in Minnesota. So they need like a home agency to be recognized, to have a CLEO, to fall under the post board authority and the rules that the post board imposes for training and education. And so that's where the lines get a little bit crossed sometimes. And I know there's been meetings in the past about how to remedy that, or if there is a remedy. In my knowledge, it will require some legislative work. It's not just as simple as putting them under the authority of the Department of Public Safety, or, you know, I've been approached, could they just be under the authority of the State Patrol? No, that won't work. for different options, but I know that I would be shocked if that bill wasn't pursued again by the entities that are pursuing it, and it will require some conversation.
And Colonel Langer, I will say I am aware of pending legislation on this topic.
So we'll probably get more comment then later.
Yeah,
then.
yeah.
All right, thank you.
So members, thank you. Thank you to everyone from the Department of Public Safety for an excellent overview. We are at time, but before we leave, members, since it's Thursday, the weekend coming up, I wanted to preview next week for members and staff and those that follow the committee. On Tuesday, we will for sure be hearing House File 195. That's Representative Elkins' bill, and we'll be having some additional conversation about commuter patterns, as in this stage of the pandemic, and changes over time in that. So that'll be an important hearing on Tuesday. We're awaiting fiscal notes, but if we get them, we might hear several of these bills on Thursday. House File 282, I mentioned that last time. That's Representative Frazier's bill related to ID cards, race and ethnic ID cards. I have House File 401. That's the omnibus bill from last year that we reached some consensus on with the Senate, and topics on that. House File 401. That needs a fiscal note too. 498, Representative Hansen. We've heard this in the past related to habitats along highways and living snow fences. Representative Pinto's bill on reintegration licenses, and then that's House File, Hansen is 498, Pinto is House File 503, and then Representative Becker-Finn has House File 490, also a topic we've had conversation before, also related to IDs. So members, have a very good weekend, and appreciate everyone's work this week, and we'll see you on Tuesday.